her underwear. I'm always thinking of her. I really think that I love her. I'm not much of a talker, so I guess that I'll just stalk her. Yeah, I'll stalk her. If she were a doggy, I would walk her. If she were a blackboard, I would chalk her.
You see her, it's getting closer to her.
Peter Falker. Oh, come on. So I'll just
there's no security. No street guard can he wanted to kill her. She'd be dead.
I'll balk her. If she were a loner from Good Times, I'd be Jimmy Walker. If she were a bathtub, I would caulk her.
Paul, you've been drinking?
Paul, I think you should leave. Yeah, that was really creepy. Yeah.
What's creepy,
Yeah,
man?
there's something very disturbing about you.
Stalking, chalking.
No, seriously, I really want you to leave.
There's a piano right out that door, and if
Guys, can we ask this guy to leave?
right now?
I'm out.
Paul, nice meeting you. Thank you
It
so
was
much.
very nice meeting all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, likewise.
When I'm trying to show him that he got a lot of attention, he got called on talk shows and
As Paul left the auditions,
Thank you.
Oh, likewise.
So that was just one of the people. There was another one I told you here. Hopefully we can get a good version of it. Just, YouTube didn't want to load these other things, so here we go. And I told you this one committed suicide, so hopefully it'll load. I don't know if it wants to. Let me try another one. I don't know as long as this computer, some of these things just don't want to load.
inside we were hoping some talent would shine through.
I'm Paula Goodspeed, and I'm from Los Angeles, California, and I'm a student. Oh yeah, definitely. I really think I'm a pop star. They call me fashion genius, I guess.
Hey, who called you that?
Everybody does.
Really?
Like I go to like entertainment school. My modeling teacher, and she's been in the business for a while,
Right.
and she's like, how did you come up with that? I mean, it fits. It just barely fits. You know, you have to carry yourself a certain way. You have to have a certain personality to be able to carry my look off. Not everybody can do it.
And where on earth could she have gotten the inspiration for this style?
I really like Paula Abdul. She's really cool.
Didn't even know her name. She
I'm
called her
a
Paula
really big fan,
Abdullah.
and I make life-size drawings of Paula. I've been drawing ever since I was a little kid, and my first drawing was of Paula Abdul.
Brace yourself, Paula. Your #1 fan is on the way.
Hi.
Hi, come on in.
How are you?
Nervous.
What's your name?
Paula.
Paula.
And my name.
You had it first, so okay.
There's a similarity here.
Huh?
More than just the name. I would say there's a similarity.
There is.
Really? I see it, definitely.
I take it as a compliment, because you're beautiful.
No, I meant it as a compliment, yeah.
Oh, thank you.
So what are you going to say?
Proud Mary by Ike and Tina Turner.
Fabulous.
I want to put your fingers in
Oh, I took a job in the city, working for a man every night and day, and I never lost 1 minute of sleep and wasn't worried about the way things might have been. Big wheel keep on turning, Proud Mary keep on burning, and we're rolling, rolling, rolling on a river. Said we're rolling, rolling, rolling on a river.
There is a similarity.
Oh, Kyle, stop it.
Paula.
Okay, I thought you meant me. Oh my god.
No, Paula and Paula.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
neither one of
Paula,
them can sing.
speechless. Don't know what to say.
Is it good or bad?
You know, no, it's not a great thing.
It's not a good thing by being speechless.
This time, no.
Okay.
No.
Randy?
That was terrible. What was that?
But I don't think any artist on earth could sing with that much metal in your mouth anyway. You have so much metal in your mouth.
She's got braces. It's not so much metal.
But it's metal.
It's braces. People have them.
People have braces.
Yeah, but can you sing with all those in?
Yes.
People can.
That's like a bridge. I mean, it's...
Can I do another song? Just do something different?
No. Randy, yes or no?
No to Hollywood.
Paula?
I'm sorry, Paula, no.
Yes or no? But nice to meet you.
Thank you, Paula.
And the love affair is over.
He can go, okay, because, I mean, I don't even care.
How did she get through the metal detector?
Oh, stop
Crazy.
I mean, I was pitchy on a couple of notes. Big deal. There's a lot of people they send to Hollywood that can't even really hold a note. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
You know, it's not over. I'm not going to stop singing just because you don't like my voice. And as far as you want original, you want someone original with a unique voice. Well, you just passed it up. I'm sorry. Peace out.
Strange way to start the day.
Again, she killed her, started stalking Paula Abdul, and she eventually ended up killing herself while she was in a car, basically sort of outside Paula Abdul's house. But that just shows you what these producers are willing to show. I swear there was another case, I couldn't find it, where there was another woman, it might have been Paula Goodspeed that came back, but I don't think they let her back into the audition that was just standing there staring at Paula. And at one point she goes, "Hi, Paula." And she just kept staring like this. With that, you saw with the other Paul guy, and it's so funny, the two people who were stalking her have her version of her name and the male version of her name. The one guy was named Paul, the other one was named Paula. It's just one of those weird coincidences. But anyway, you can see with that one guy, that first guy, my gosh. I mean, you want to talk about premeditated murder, that's premeditated stalking. I don't know what was going on there. That guy obviously he probably wrote several versions of that song and edited it. And he had it memorized perfectly. There wasn't a skip or an or ah or a stammer or a stutter. He was on it. And he kept using those vulgar references instead of cock, and he was saying caulk. And saying William Faulkner and stuff like that. Just bizarre. And again, what this shows is what the media is willing to deal in all day long. It also speaks to the fact that media companies and these reality shows are consistently getting closer and closer to each other. Whoever's the most successful usually sets the tone. For example, I saw an article the other day. They were saying with this American Idol, they're trying to find people who have more of the voice than just looks, and part of this has to do with that new show with Christina Aguilera on it and CeeLo Green, and I'm not sure, I forget who the other guy is. But anyway, that things are shifting more towards that because I think people in America, look, you know, not, according to Jerry Seinfeld, only 1 in 20 people are dateable. So let's face it, if you have a good voice, the chances of you also being good looking are probably maybe 50-50 at that. And I think I mentioned to you this Milli Vanilli stuff, and this bothers a lot of Americans that there's such an obsession about vanity. I mean, if there was an obsession with vanity, Luther Vandross would have never had a career. I mean, seriously. I mean, he weighed 250 pounds. He was an ugly guy, but he was also did not fit, in general, what most celebrities look like. So anyway, so I wanted to show you that since I mentioned that as a reference last time. All right, let's move to do the test. Or review the test. I'll go up to question 1 and answer questions if you want, but this one is very straightforward. So basically in the first question I'm asking you what is cultivation theory. We've talked about that repeatedly. The general idea of cultivation theory is that heavy TV viewing is the difference between heavy viewers and light viewers, that heavy viewers are going to tend to have views and attitudes and beliefs about the real world, particularly things like crime or racial stereotypes or gender stereotypes that resemble what is being presented on TV. And we looked at that as sort of a linear relationship. And we looked at TV viewing, and the impact on people's views, particularly when it came to crime, violence, stereotypes. Media plays in, also things like sexual behavior. Okay. If you believe sitcoms and the television, people have sex with multiple partners 3 or 4 times a week, if not, 3 or 4 times a day. Okay, it's an absurd reality. But people believe this stuff. And one of the reasons why they suggest this occurs goes back to some of the stuff about conflict theory, that the ownership of media companies is so narrow that it tends to narrow content, and it also has to do with the fact of what type of content is profitable. And it's violence and sex, or it's racial stereotypes, or it's gender-based stereotypes, or whatever it is, okay? That the media deals in money. Okay? When you have 4 or 5 companies that are intensely competing over shrinking amounts of market share, or they have more and more channels, yet less and less people are watching each channel. I mean, it used to be a network show, the big network show in the 1980s would get 70% of the people watching the show. Cheers would get 65–70% of the entire viewing audience that day. Okay, at that time slot at 8 o'clock. It was a big show. I mean, you look at the Cosby Show used to do this type of stuff. Nowadays, networks are fighting over 5 and 6%. Okay? One thing they have figured out how to make more money on is selling things into syndication. So again, some of the issues with this is it's linear. It doesn't take into effect how the cultivation effect then impacts TV viewing, and it also doesn't deal with social demographic variables, and the impacts of personality. So those are some of the issues right there. Okay. Also, one of the issues where Gerbner talked about why television in particular had so much power versus something like a newspaper or a book or something like that was that television obviously used images, but it also used a narrative structure to tell a story and exaggerate things using dramatic tension, which are all things that impact people's emotions and thoughts when it comes to interpreting material. And also, through ignoring at least social demographic and personality variables, really created a sense of a less active audience. So within that question of what is cultivation theory is what do cultivation theorists say is the impact of violence on TV on people's attitude towards crime and support for harsher penalties for crime. In your answer, discuss the mean world syndrome. Okay? And I remember I talked about where you can find that in the index. Alright, and all these concepts, I should tell you this stuff. But anyway, if you want quick references for these concepts and theories, you can just look back in the index. It'll tell you multiple pages. You can go straight to those pages. For example, mainstreaming, not only are there pages that they're going to list, there's a whole chapter on it. Alright, so why does television show violence at such a high rate? You want to connect to the drive to profit there by media companies. He talked about that in chapters 1 and 2. And it should violence, and this here I'm asking you to give your opinion but back it up with evidence or any kind of other support from the government or any other research or research in the book about should violence on television be reduced and why. And you may want to look up one of the articles mentioned in the book that deals with the mean world theory. Okay, and those are all in the back. You can also look in the reference section or the middle of chapter 6. It discusses all these things. The middle of chapter 6 listed all these studies that were done. It lists the mean world theory, TV and sex roles, charting the mainstream, TV, sex and AIDS, soaps and cultivation, cognitive processes, cultivation and group affiliation, all these things. But you can look these up on Google Scholar or on JSTOR. Okay, I'm not requiring you to do this, but again, you want to show me you're creative, you want to show me you fully understand these things, you go back and look at these things. At least at the very minimum, look at the descriptions that are given in chapter 6. All right, any questions on question 1? All right, move on to question number 2. This one is a little trickier of a concept, and I'm going to read a few pages out of the book to illustrate some of the points here, so make sure you're ready to write down the page numbers here. So the concept of mainstreaming. Okay? One of the things that sort of, when those criticisms I just put down on cultivation theory, other theorists and scientists started discussing these things. They said, look. Whatever you're seeing here, you're not fully exploring what you're seeing, and are you sure what this connection, this correlation that you're seeing through your statistics is first valid, and 2, is it generalizable to a larger audience, and also, where are the elements of personality? Where are the elements of where someone's belief system started from when they started watching whatever, a political show or a sitcom or a crime and drama? If you're somebody who's never been afraid of crime, just watching CSI and Law and Order is not necessarily going to make you afraid of crime. But here with mainstreaming, what we're talking about here many times are political positions. And one of the things that Gerbner found out, as well as other people who were doing research in this area, and if you have an issue, let's say abortion, okay, and we have light viewers. Let me see how they did this chart. They start examining this on 7.9. So they put light viewing down here. Heavy viewing down here. One of the things that they said at the very minimum is like, look, we want to look at viewing habits plus political identification, meaning conservative, moderate, or liberal. They started actually just looking at liberals and conservatives, which ignores 45 to 55% of the entire U.S. population, which neither considers themselves Democrat, Republican, or conservative, or liberal. And that's why presidents and politicians have repeatedly failed to get any legislation done, because every single one of these people in Congress are outside of the mainstream of what most middle-class Americans think should be done. There's not a single middle-class American who thinks that taxes for rich people should be cut. And yet every single time politicians get into office, that's exactly what they do. And they cut taxes on corporations, and they lower environmental regulations. This is all things that the U.S. American population does not agree with. And then they run up the national debt, and they start wars in foreign countries, because the stuff the CIA was doing in the 1980s, and it's absurd. You saw the dark side. Should give you a lesson about who politicians really are. Okay? Politicians care about one thing, and one thing only. Whether you're the president or whether you're in Congress. And what is it? Re-election. That's it. That's all they care about. And they'll do whatever it takes. They'd shoot their own mother in the face to get another term in office. That's how ugly things are in Washington right now. And the president just said, I'm going to lie to the American public until I get reelected. And then the real Barack Obama is going to come out. Like he's going to tear off his skin or like turn into the Hulk or something. That is completely disingenuous, and it is very insulting, and he's not the only one. Bush and Clinton and all the rest of them thought and acted like this. Richard Nixon was probably the worst of them all. Okay? That you are delaying making decisions about the U.S. budget, the health care issue, the war on terror, the war in Afghanistan and Iraq, all of these things, you are delaying these decisions, driving up the national debt. We don't even have a federal budget. Just so you can get your name in the history book. That tends to bother people. Okay? That's abuse to some extent. That's at the very minimum using the American public. Okay? And is he going to get reelected? You can probably bet on it. I'd put $100,000 on that right now. I mean, name somebody's... Something... And it could happen. Something crazy would have to happen for Obama to lose re-election. Seriously. Like some charismatic person would have to come out of the Republican. Or a third party candidate could happen. Or unemployment shoots up 2 or 3%, and which probably is not going to happen, but you never know. Or God, hope to God this doesn't happen, but something like 9/11 or something like that would make people would not have any faith. We've gone for 10 years without an attack, 11 years without an attack. If it occurred under Obama's watch, don't you think he'd get blamed for it? Right or wrong, right?
Yeah, but wait, what happened with 9/11 first time? Didn't occur on Bush's watch, and they reelected?
But here's the thing. Bush could say that we didn't know, we didn't understand the threat, which is a lie because they had the national intelligence reports in August saying that bin Laden was, but now we know you weren't minding the store, and that's why it happened. Whereas the entire rest of the Bush administration, did another terrorist attack happen on American soil? Any large-scale attack happen when President Bush was in office? So the Republicans would make hay all day with that, wouldn't they? They'd be like, see? You let a Democrat in office, that's exactly what happens. That's exactly what they would say. And a lot of the American people would be like, yep. And all the other stuff that they don't like about Obama would start to come out. Okay? Obama's on the edge of a razor blade to some extent. There's people who like him, but there's also people who are like, man, you better do something soon, or you're going down. You know, I mean, he reminds me of Calvin Coolidge. We'll talk about it, you know, president. Oh my gosh. And his one piece of legislation he got passed is being challenged in the Supreme Court right now. And I got news for you. If it passes, those of you who don't have health insurance, welcome to $1,000 premium a month, or $500 or $800. Do you want to give a healthcare company $400 of your money a month? I priced healthcare. It's $6,000 to $7,000 a year. It's absurd. And are any of you really going to get sick? Hopefully. Not really. Come on. You guys are 22 and 23. What are you going to have? A heart attack? A stroke? I mean, the worst thing having to use for your health is that you get cancer somehow, which would be horrible, right? Or you get some kind of disease. But that's about it. 20-year-olds don't get sick. Okay? Maybe you need a flu shot. Or maybe you break a leg. I mean, some accident might happen where you do need health insurance, but my gosh, $7,000 to $8,000 a year for health insurance? That is absurd. That's almost as much as rent in most places. People don't spend that much on food, you know. So anyway, but the point back to the idea here is that we take abortion, for example, and let's say here's the conservative position, here's the moderate position, there's the liberal position. So what's the conservative position on abortion? Right, for the most part, either limiting it or eliminating it. I think the extremists want to get rid of it completely. Most reasonable people think that that's an absurdity because, look, because you know, there's Republicans that are doctors and they'll tell you, look, there's a reason why we need to at least legalize certain kinds of abortion. What about the health of the mother? What about rape and incest? What about that kind of stuff? I'm like, so you can't. And what happens when you outlaw something that people think that they need? They start to go behind the alleys, on card tables with knives. At one point, you know, Ireland is a devout Catholic nation, the Republic of Ireland, and that abortion was absolutely illegal. Anybody ever been to Ireland? They don't play games with this stuff. Okay? At one point, it got so crazy because people wanted abortions, they would take them on boats out into international water and have the doctor perform the abortion out in international waters. I think they have, does anybody know? I'm pretty sure they have lifted some of the restrictions on abortion. Okay, it's still controversial. So anyway, but again, so the conservative position is that. What's the moderate position on abortion? I've sort of almost said part of it.
Sometimes it's needed, sometimes.
Yeah, like look, we don't want people. Most of modern, and if you ask most Americans, and particularly men, they'll tell you, look. I'm not going to tell a woman what to do with her body, but when you start using abortion for birth control, it's a little. That's what some moderates would tell you. Other moderates would be like, look, we want it, but we want people to be counseled on it. We want people to be educated on what this process is. We would prefer people not to do this. There's adoption. There's other options. But if it actually comes down to it, we believe that, hey, we're individuals in this country, we have the right to do things, let's do it. What's the liberal position? It's somewhat close to the moderate position.
They
basically look at demand. It's not, the idea is that, look, the woman's body is her own, and she can do what she wants with it, and if she wants to deal with this, do an abortion, hey, and if it's immoral, you'll find out when you're dead. If it's truly wrong, by the law of God, you'll pay for it. But liberals will tell you, look, it's not the government's job to invade upon somebody's personal behavior. Just like liberals believe that marijuana should be legal. Not because they all want to smoke it, although most of them do. Okay, including Bill Clinton. Okay. He didn't inhale. Hillary did, anyway. But they'll tell you, look, this is an element of personal freedom. This isn't about getting high. And they'll tell you as well, marijuana kills virtually no one. Alcohol kills 12,000 people from drunk driving deaths alone. Kills another 7,000 just from overdose deaths. It's connected to stomach cancer, throat cancer, mouth cancer. Okay? For some reason, it alters the way people behave sexually, too. I don't know anybody who tries to get people stoned so they can have sex with them. I mean, I'm sure maybe it works, but I don't think so. Okay? They're not dragging. I mean, there is weed down at spring break, but there's way more alcohol. Okay? Anyway. And I've never met anybody, I've met a few people who said that when they smoked weed, they vomited. Most people who drank alcohol have puked repeatedly. And if it's something where it was a taste kind of like a red wine or like one of those fruit drinks, you'll never drink that again. Like if it's sour apple schnapps or something like that, that's the end of that. Or if it's tequila, that's the end of tequila. Because if you can smell it again, it makes you nauseous. See? Some of you know. Lie to me. Anyway, but again, let's take something like this. So what they said was, look, like viewers, liberals would show the liberal position, moderates would have the moderate position, and conservatives would have the conservative position. Now what they say is, look, if the television shows the moderate position, so let's just say that the television shows the moderate position. That the moderate position is abortion should be legal, but it shouldn't be on demand, and the government shouldn't pay for it, or whatever it is. Some position like that. We'll do this again with some other things as well. That the moderates would, because the TV shows the moderate position, that heavy viewers that are moderates, their behavior or views wouldn't change. Liberals, on the other hand, would come more towards the moderate position if they were heavy viewers, and conservatives too. Now, it depends. Here's probably one of the biggest thing that this depends upon. What is the TV's position on the issue? Now, one of the issues with this is, does culture change over time? Has the attitude of Americans towards abortion and marijuana and the death penalty changed over time, either waxed or waned in support? Has this happened? Right? At one point, believe it or not, in the 1970s, I love this. Does anybody know why Charles Manson didn't get the death penalty? It's actually a curious circumstance of when he was sentenced and cultural change. Anybody know what happened in the United States in the early 70s with the death penalty? It was outlawed. It was ruled unconstitutional, and it was outlawed in California. And Manson was going to get the death penalty, and they what do they call it? Whatever, transmuted the sentence or whatever. They altered the sentence to give him life in prison. He actually comes up for parole every 5 years, which nobody wants to be on the parole board that lets Charles Manson. And he knows it's a joke, so he goes up there and makes a big show of it. Geraldo interviewed him once, and Geraldo goes, "Do you want to kill me?" He's like, "Yeah, I'm going to kill all of you. I'm going to kill everybody when I get out of here." So, and they probably got him on some serious drugs and stuff. And he's in his 70s now. But regardless, the positions on the death penalty have changed over time. Sometimes positions on certain things, you know, over time will go from lack of support to support. I would say that's what happened with abortion. We've gone from a situation in the 1950s. Do you think in the 1950s a lot of people were publicly talking about abortion? I mean, you can get accused of being all kinds. You're a baby killer. I mean, maybe they call you a communist. I mean, whatever word that you could use. I mean, in the late 40s, even birth control was a really controversial subject. I mean, it still was even into the 50s. So things changed. So some things change like this over time. The death penalty sometimes goes like this. Depending on what people's attitudes, some people will be supporting it. Other people, you know, over time will be against it. I would say marijuana too as well. During the 80s, people didn't the last thing in their mind was to legalize it. Although in the early 1980s they tried to legalize cocaine because judges and lawyers were all using it. And then you know what stopped it? Crack. As soon as crack came along and was and cocaine became sort of an inner city drug, like a poor man's drug, then as soon as that happened, it became like not cool to do it anymore. Also, people started to realize that, like Richard Pryor, started getting addicted to it. He poured ether or alcohol on himself and caught himself on fire and went running down the street. He almost died. He also had a heart attack too. People like Belushi were dying years earlier and stuff like that. So a lot of things, but again, if you look at marijuana, in the 60s, people wanted to legalize, the late 60s especially, into the 70s. The 80s, it was the opposite. The 90s, people wanted to legalize again. And during the Bush administration, there really wasn't that much discussion about it, but you could guess that most people didn't want it legalized. Let me put it this way. What's proof that people don't want it legalized? Has it been legalized? No. And when Americans want something legalized, it pretty much gets done. The problem with marijuana is it has such a public stigma that if you go out in public support, like Pat Robertson came out. You guys know who Pat Robertson is? He's the leader of the Christian, Christian organization. He's a well-known preacher. He ran for president actually several times in the 80s. He came out in favor of marijuana. Do you think he's a pothead? I mean, he might be now. Maybe he's on chemotherapy or something, right? You know, and medical marijuana is different than saying legalizing. Pat Robertson wants it legalized. And some of the reasons why is that he wants to take the money out of it so gangs can't use it anymore. He wants to get to the point where, you know, it'll be more regulated and controlled. He wants it taxed. And what's driving the Mexican drug war is not cocaine. They make the most money off of marijuana. I mean, only about 3 to 4 million people in this country use cocaine on a regular basis. I've seen statistics that talk 40 or 50 million people on a regular basis smoke marijuana. Now, the cartels would prefer to smuggle coke because you can jam it into little smaller packages and make more money per pound. But they make the majority of their money off of this. So again, things have waxed and waned. So let's take the death penalty, for example, and I'll show you how this works here. So again, we have a conservative, moderate, liberal position. Here's light viewing. Here's heavy viewing. If the general view, so here's liberals and moderates and conservatives. And let's say we're in a situation where, let's do a little bit of a poll. Who here supports the death penalty? Who here doesn't support the death penalty? All right, it's about half and half. But let's say at this point, so that's the public view. But what do you think the TV's view of the death penalty is? What's the TV's view of the death penalty? Those of you who watch crime dramas or watch news and stuff like that. Does the news support the application of the death penalty, or does it call into question the application of the death penalty? All right, let's be more specific. What do local television stations in Texas think about the death penalty? Yeah. So let's just take that. So let's say you watch a high amount of local news programming and political programming from Texas. You're probably in support, the television view is in support of the death penalty. So the conservative position would be the one that doesn't change at this point, because light viewers and heavy viewers would see it the same way. Moderates, however, would move towards the conservative position and be more likely to support application, not only application, but expansion of the death penalty, and liberals would be much closer to it as well. Okay, you can see this. So let me read this. I think this is instructional as far as... Okay, on page 141, it says here, thus cultivation is to be seen mostly in interaction with other variables. Mainstreaming is the particular interaction in which cultivation is stronger for some groups, weaker or absent for others. So here, if the idea is that the level of TV viewing is one of the main components here, which groups are being most cultivated when it comes to abortion? Meaning, who are being most impacted by being from light viewers to heavy viewers on this issue? Mark? And liberals too. So if you're already in concert with the views of TV on a particular issue, and no matter whether you watch light amounts or heavy amounts, how much is your view going to change? Very little. And this explains the researchers use this to explain why certain people seem to be impacted more by TV than others. That if I'm already lockstep with the TV. I don't need any more encouragement. Like I said, you can only support abortion, so you can only be so much of a supporter of abortion. It's just like racism or gender discrimination. You can only hate people so much. You know, I mean, seriously, you can only be so racist or be so sexist or whatever it is. So there's a limit to what the TV can do to your behavior. And most people, I think most Americans find it an offensive idea that they get their views from television. But that's what stupid people do, isn't it? I mean, I don't think most Americans go, yeah, the television tells me what to do. I don't think there's a single American, even if that's true, that would admit that. Do you? Yeah, the television tells me what to do. That sounds weak, it sounds stupid, it sounds like your brain is turned into mush. Maybe that's why you're supporting marijuana. Anyway. So it goes here, in the particular interaction in which cultivation is stronger for some subgroups, weaker or absent for others, and in which heavy viewers' responses are closer than those of light viewers, see figure 7.5. When these conditions are not met, mainstreaming is not present. But even within these constraints, there are a variety of explanations that might reflect mainstreaming. After we have observed mainstreaming, it becomes logical to ask which groups show cultivation and when, under what condition. It is an important question, but one that has mostly eluded cultivation researchers, who have not tended to make specific mainstreaming predictions in advance. And this has not been lost on critics. We need an account that helps us better understand when to expect mainstreaming and where to expect cultivation to be stronger and weaker. In this section, we look at several different possibilities for constructing more exact descriptions of and predictions about mainstreaming. So you see on 7.6, 7.7, and 7.8, you see some of those things that I drew up on the board. And that, look, normally, like let's take something like the acceptance of homosexuality. At this present time, in 2012, the majority of television stations show homosexuality as what? Deviant or acceptable? Acceptable. So if you're a conservative and you watch heavy amounts of TV, what might that do to your views of homosexuality?
Draw you towards the moderate.
Right, you may be much more accepting. Maybe not with your conservative friends. Maybe you still run your mouth about how, oh, this is terrible and it's an insult to God. Maybe when you're in church. But you're going to be impacted by the fact that, hey, maybe somebody in your social group really doesn't like homosexuals and they say, hey, these people are degenerates and blah, blah, but you see Ellen on TV every day. And Ellen's not a degenerate, is she? She's not some kind of weirdo. She's not engaging in eight people orgies and going out and taking her top off in public or doing drugs or anything. And wasn't at one point she married to Portia de Rossi? Do they have kids?
No.
I thought they adopted. That's Rosie O'Donnell. Okay. So, or take some, like, Rosie is a weirdo. But she's not weird because she's gay. She's weird because she's a comedian. Right? She'd be that way if she's a man. You know, I mean, seriously. She's a goofball. And when you're a comedian, the goal is to be a goofball. Or I'm trying to think, somebody name a gay man. Gay men get less acceptance.
Neil Patrick Harris?
Right, and people like him, right? And what I love about him in that show, I don't watch it, I've maybe seen it once, How I Met Your Mother. He's playing like a raging heterosexual, which on some level, some heterosexual men might be offended, but you're a gay man trying to make heterosexual men look like a bunch of lunatic, you know, sexual obsessed. Like, he's very shallow in that show. He's kind of a jerk. He's obsessed with. He's like the Charlie Sheen character in 2.5 Men a little bit, right? But people don't. And the thing about Neil Patrick Harris, he was. Some of you know this, some of you don't. Just like Mayim Bialik was Blossom, he was Doogie Howser, and so people saw him from a kid grow up. So maybe when they find out he's gay, they're like a little bit shocked or a little bit. But for most people, if you find out one of your friends or coworkers is gay, let's just take it from a perspective of the law. Are you allowed to discriminate against them? So the public view as well. There's another thing as well, even though they don't talk about this necessarily. Not only when the TV view, okay, not only when the TV view is particularly perspective, but also there's this idea of resonance. That when the general public thinks something is okay, the general public thinks the death penalty, regardless of TV watching. It's much more likely to reinforce these value systems. And I would submit to you that other than the government altering laws about homosexuality, has there been a more important institution in the acceptance of homosexuality in this society than the entertainment industry and the media? I'm seriously, think about it. Does religion support homosexuality on the whole? Do schools talk about homosexuality in a positive way on a lot of levels? I don't think they talk. There was a controversial book. Some of you probably, if you teach class, there was this controversial book that they put out in elementary schools that was called something like Bobby's Two Dads or something like that. Like stuff like that. And that blew up. Like that was like worse than not teaching creationism in Missouri. And I mean, you guys realize that like in Kansas and Missouri they teach creationism right next to evolution like it's the fact, like it's a fact. And if you go to the Vatican, they'll tell you that creationism, you shouldn't take this stuff literal, like the book of Genesis. The Vatican has a scientist, all right? The Vatican is not necessarily completely at odds with a lot of the science. What they say is, they'll tell you it's intelligent design, that God created evolution. And this is that we are unable to see it from a far enough perspective that like the 7 days in Genesis that God, or 6 days that God, even He took the day off. Okay. And the 6 days is actually like 6 billion years. I mean, I'm sure most of you have heard this. So I'm sure some of you go to churches where they talk about this openly. The church would not like to get into a fight with science. Science doesn't care. Okay? Although there are scientists out there trying to prove that God exists, which we can't call it. Okay. What are you going to look through a telescope and God's going to wave back at you? And I always love it. Especially Christians have this, God is an old man in a robe with a beard. Do you really think if God could be anything it wanted to be, that it would be an old man with a gray beard, hobbling along? I mean, wearing sandals? I mean, come on. Probably look like Brad Pitt or something, or George Clooney. I mean, pick your attractive person. Way better looking than that. Okay. Anyway, so back to these positions here. So a lot of this has to do with where people are coming from. And so they break down these hypotheses that 1, that heavy TV viewing leads towards the middle. 2, that heavy TV viewing, where it presents a conservative position, will push heavy viewers toward that conservative position. And then the last one there, the hypothesis 3, brings in the more moderate position as well. But I can't believe they would not put moderates in there. Again, I told you repeatedly that moderates dominate this country. That's why it's mind-boggling to me that it seems every single time we get somebody in the White House, they turn out to be a liberal or conservative and not a moderate. I think that was one of the, although Bill Clinton didn't come into office as a liberal, I think one of his great successes was becoming a moderate. I think Obama, and especially George Bush, needed to learn these lessons. I just want them to balance the budget. I mean, my gosh, with this crap. But on page 147, they look at some of the questions, some of the issues that they looked at in these studies that were done on mainstreaming. And here are some of the questions that they answered, or that they asked people to answer. And they asked them, how much TV do you watch? What's your political position? And then what's your position on these issues? So here are some of the questions they asked. Please tell me whether or not you think it's possible for a pregnant woman to obtain a legal abortion if she wants it for any reason. So that would be in support. If you said yes, that would be in support of almost the ultra-liberal position. If you said no, that would be in support of either the moderate or the conservative position. Suppose an admitted homosexual wants to make a speech in your community, should be allowed to do so. And you can see how these answers change over time. If it's 1982, a lot more people are saying no, aren't they? And if it's the 1950s, they'd be like, why is a gay person out in public anyway? That's what they would say. Like, should they be in jail? I hope. Do you guys realize that in the early 1960s, if you were gay, openly gay, what could the government do to you?
Institutionalize it?
Well, they could do that because it was considered to be a psychosis. There was one other thing they could do that was even probably worse. They could put you in jail. Homosexuality was against the law, and it wasn't illegal to be gay. It was illegal to perform gay sex acts. So if you engaged in fellatio or anal sex, if you were a man, you were in trouble. And it was primarily men that went to jail. For some reason, and I guess it makes sense to some extent, male homosexuals have gotten the brunt of every kind of negativity and type of violence and vilification, whereas lesbians don't get that type of vilification. Nobody torments Rosie O'Donnell and wants to kill her and drag her down the street. Maybe she doesn't stop singing. Maybe. Again, this is more about her talent than it is anything. You know, whereas, you know, if they make a show like Brokeback Mountain about lesbians, the guys would go just to see two girls kissing. Nobody bitched at Britney Spears for kissing. Didn't she kiss Madonna or something like that? What if a George Clooney, Brad Pitt French kiss? How would that look? You know, I don't think that would go. People. Whereas when Britney did it and Madonna did it, people were like, cool. If Brad Pitt, George Clooney did it, people were like, ugh. Seriously. And the proof of this is if you ever seen that Seinfeld episode where they thought George and Jerry were gay. Remember they kept going, no, we're not gay. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but no, we're not. And it was like, no, you're freaking out over this. Because it used to be, if you were a man and if somebody found out you were gay, you could be killed. People would kill you. They would, at the very minimum, beat the hell out of you. And if you dared to hit on them, oh my gosh. It's like you stabbed a baby in the face. I mean, they were at you now. I mean, they would go get a gang of 7 or 8 people and beat the hell out of you. Okay? In Laramie, just about 10 or 15 years ago, these 2 guys in a bar found out this one guy was gay, and they tricked him and they got him drunk and everything, and they beat the hell out of him, and then they tied him to a fence and he died. They made a play about it. It's called Laramie. Okay? And again, do you think Brokeback Mountain would have been that controversial if it had been women? I mean, seriously. You think it would have been about lesbians? And I'll tell you right now, that don't ask, don't tell stuff, I don't think they've ever kicked a lesbian out of the military. I would be shocked if that happened. Because lesbians are perceived as good soldiers. Right? The stereotype of the lesbian, right or wrong, is of this butch woman with bigger biceps than any gay man ever would have. That would knock the hell out of you if you said it with the buzz haircut, which is not true. Look at Portia de Rossi. Is that a butch person there? I don't think so. I mean, for the longest time, before I knew she was gay, I was attracted to her. So, anyway. So there's some of the questions. Also things like, do you think there should be laws against marriages between blacks and whites? It is important for a wife to help her husband's career more than herself. There's gender stereotypes. And it says, generally, previous studies have revealed that television messages tend to cultivate acceptance of more conservative positions associated with these questions. That study was done in 1986. Things have changed since then. Thus, for instance, heavy viewers would be less likely to accept free speech for homosexuals. Heavy viewers have also been more likely to discriminate based on race, sex, and to be less tolerant on abortion questions. That has all changed. We analyzed associations between amount of viewing and these questions in much the same way it had been done in earlier studies. And again, you see what they found here. If you see the way they interpret these numbers is, if it's closer to 2, then it's closer to the conservative position. That's why when on abortion, conservatives that are light viewers of television are 1.7, and heavy viewers of TV are 1.69. Those people don't get impacted because they're already in view. If you actually look at liberals on abortion, they go from 1.41, which is the liberal position that abortion should be on demand, to a much more conservative position at 1.55. One of the things, though, and I'm trying to figure out what question is on there. They didn't list a question about, I'm trying to find the one they asked about marijuana, because that was the one that was different. It showed that even if you were conservative, and this is the 80s, even if you were conservative, but if you watched heavy amounts of TV, you'd be much more likely to favor the legalization of marijuana. Why? What does the television show about marijuana that would probably impact people's view? Does the television show a conservative view of marijuana? In TV shows and music? Yeah, I mean, basically marijuana is sort of like this, it's not even an underground drug anymore, is it? I mean, it's just out in the open. Dr. Dre put a marijuana leaf on the front of one of his albums. He called it the name of the album was The Chronic. Okay? And they can call it Nestle or whatever I didn't know Nelly called it Nestle one time. You can call it whatever you want. Okay? Tea, weed, grass, whatever the hell. It's all the same. And it's not even an underground drug anymore. Think of movies like Half-Baked. Think of the Cheech and Chong franchise. Okay? I saw an episode of Friends with John Lovitz on it when he got high. Right? He was like a food critic, and he got high, and he went over to, who's the one that was is it Courtney Cox that was a food she was a chef, and he came over and he didn't even want her food. He was like digging through her cabinets, and he found mac and cheese. He's like, we gotta make this, dude. So, and then they make light of it. And if you actually look at it, are there any comedies about cocaine? Are there any comedies about heroin use? No. Maybe those people who do the Scary Movie franchise need to do something like that, like Blow, make a joke about Blow. But people, would that succeed if they made a parody of heroin use? No, because it's insulting to a lot of people. Because heroin and cocaine kill you. They kill people. You know, I mean, people get addicted. Most people, and that's why Dave Chappelle and Half Baked made that joke about when he was talking to the girl in the movie, and she said, and her dad was in jail, and he said, what for? And she said, marijuana. And he's like, well, damn, just for weed? And she goes, no, not just. Marijuana leads to harder things. And he said, yeah, like junk food. So making a complete joke about it. And one point they got the dog high, and it flew out the window, and a cape came back on its back, and stuff like that. So they were at least, the stated view by the government is that this is bad, and it harms people, and it leads to hard drugs, and you're supporting terrorists and gangs by buying it. That's all they can say about it. They can't say it kills you and all this other stuff. They still use that thing that it makes you crazy, which is stuff like back from the 30s. But in general, I would venture to say, in a private polling data, that probably 70 to 75% of the American public supports at least decriminalization, or at least thinks it's not a big deal. And I'll tell you right now, once these people from the Depression and the World War II era start dropping dead, which is in the next 20, 30 years, you know who's going to be left running this country? The baby boomer hippies who grew up were kids in the 50s, were teens in the 60s, and were in their 20s and the 70s. And I'm telling you right now, I'm sure many of you come across this with your parents. Some of them were honest with you and sat you down and said, yeah, look, Dad did this stuff. And it messed me up. And I succeeded despite this. You know, Woodstock was great, but it wasn't, and they're partly lying. Woodstock was probably unbelievable. Unless you eat the brown acid, and then you're really in trouble. But anyway, but some of them will just straight out lie to you. Say, don't have sex before you get married, and don't smoke weed, and don't drink, while they're standing there with a brandy and a cigarette in their hand, and probably a bag of weed in their back room there. Anyway, have like a bong they use for a flower vase. But anyway, but again, so what this proves about the abortion stuff, the death penalty stuff, views change over time. So one of the elements that needs to change in these studies is how they view what is the TV view. But in 1986, this is what they found out here. And if you see here, that's right. All right, so I guess they're trying to say here that people who watch more TV would be more likely to support the keeping marijuana illegal. Sex roles, I think, are very interesting here. You see the liberals move way down on the scale up, meaning that the heavier amounts of TV viewing that liberals do, the more they believe sex role stereotypes. Now again, this is the 1980s, and there's part of the problem itself. Excuse me. Alright, so basically I want you to look at those elements that are mainstream. Also, part of the question is, what the hell is wrong with this? Anyway, so basically, trace the development and criticism of change. I talked about it was this element of that this, at the very minimum, brought in a social demographic variable, what we call an intervening variable. Whereas before it was just heavy viewing, and that was views on whatever it was, the TV, views of crime, views of the death penalty. Now, in between here, we're putting political identification. And they started to do that more and more. They started to put in things like age and race and gender or what neighborhood you lived in. And it made the theory a lot better. It made it a lot more applicable. It made it a lot more sensical. Remember some of you talked about when I asked you about the chapter last time. Remember they called it the black box, that they were trying to look inside the cognitive functionings. That originally when cultivation theory was developed, it really was just looking at the simple thing of, Gerbner wanted to know, what happens, what is the difference between people's views, whether or not they watch small amounts of TV or large amounts of TV. And then then psychological theorists came along and said, wait, you are missing a major component here. People aren't sheep. So part of this was this idea of the active audience, and the role of interpretation. And that's what's down here. Okay. Now I will put notes on here. This is sometimes called the feedback loop theory. I will put notes. I thought I already put them up there, but I'll do that before the end of this afternoon, as soon as I get done with my second class. That describes this in a little more detail. But it was also talked about, if you want to look at it, I would tell you to go back and watch that that Frontline documentary that I showed you part of that was called Merchants of Cool. But I'll outline what this means here when we get to the third question. Now, the second part of this question, I'm asking you specifically to focus on Hirsch's criticism in chapters 4 and 5. Let me show you how to do this. So you go back here, and you look for Hirsch, and it says right here, page 70 to 75. Okay. So here's what Hirsch and some of his colleagues said. They looked at this stuff and they said, wait. Because, look, scientists, one of the ways they get publications or get notoriety is not only developing their own theories, which Gerbner did, but testing of the theories, correcting it, and criticizing it. So Hirsch and some of his other colleagues said this stuff here. It said, sparked by the regular publication of cultivation findings and dependably annual violent profiles, and building on the momentum generated by the critiques discussed above, the research discourse of the 1980s cast cultivation into a massive wave of replications, attacks, responses, and rejoinders. There were some independent confirmations of cultivation results, and some extensions into other issues and methods. And many dissertations and unpublished reports were helping to enlarge the literature base of cultivation. There were also some friendly criticisms offered by researchers who were generally sympathetic to cultivation, but felt it would benefit from various theoretical and methodological modifications. These included issues such as whether cultivation should use overall viewing measures or exposure to specific types of programs. So there was one issue right there. So write that down. That cultivation did not take into account what shows people watch. That's a problem right there, right? Then came the well-known reanalysis by Hughes and Hirsch. So here we go. Of NORC data, which is the National Opinion Research Center. Data which had been analyzed and reported in violence profiles 8 and 9 in 1977 and 78. Hirsch's reanalysis analyses, in particular, led to fierce, prolonged battles, occasionally acrimonious and vituperative. Anyway, the controversies consumed literally hundreds of pages of scholarly journals. The repercussions were felt at academic conferences and even spilled over into such media, popular media as Time magazine. These battles have been characterized as everything from healthy scholarly exchanges to scathing exposés to vicious and unprofessional spats. Regardless, they attest to the timely prominence of cultivation theory and to the fact that cultivation analysis was not a static research approach, but one that evolved and developed in numerous ways, making it more complex and intricate, but also more dynamic and intriguing. So the saying that, look, these criticisms made the theory better. It's eventually what led to the mainstreaming stuff. It eventually made this concept of the theory needs to include things like people's personalities. They need to be less linear, more reciprocal, meaning there are circular relationships going on here. Like example, I'm not, but use this repeatedly. If I am a Democrat, I'm not watching Bill O'Reilly, and if I'm a Republican, I'm not listening to Al Franken, okay, or Keith Olbermann. I'm just not going to do it. And cultivation did not take into account those things. If I'm an older person, I'm not watching, what was that, The Vampire Diaries? Probably not. Maybe, but most likely not. I'll tell you right now, or if I'm older, I'm not watching MTV. Or I'm not watching Nickelodeon. I'm not watching iCarly or Degrassi or any of these shows. I'm not watching the Disney Channel unless it's with my kids. Right? And if I am watching the Disney Channel, I'm not taking what they say seriously. Miley Cyrus is not impacting my sense of fashion. Okay. God, wearing a cardboard box is probably more fashion than what that girl does. And what's happened to her? She disappeared. Her and Demi Lovato disappeared off the earth.
She does punk now.
Yeah, that'll work out for you. Child stars have a hard time because they get boxed in very early on, like Gary Coleman. I mean, he played that role on Different Strokes, and that was about it. Now, part of it is because he was so short, and there's really limited roles and stuff for people like that. But in general, if you get boxed in, you know, sometimes it works when you're Harrison Ford. It's okay to be Indiana Jones or Han Solo. But in general, if you're, that's why I'm surprised with Doogie Howser. He didn't get boxed in, you know, and stuff like that. So, because Doogie Howser is a much different character than the one he plays now. But again, once you get boxed in like that, like Miley Cyrus, she will always be Hannah Montana, and there's nothing she can do to stop that. Now, I hope to God she saved her money, because I don't see a career for this young woman. I just don't see it. She has. I don't think she'd get past the first round on American Idol. I mean, seriously, that Paul Weirdo guy sang better than she does on a lot of levels. And even though it was a twisted song, it was somewhat creative that he was able to. I mean, you saw Paula was almost didn't know what to think about it at first. Like she was sort of flattered, but then he started talking about stalking, and it was like, man. Anyway, and Simon was all creeped out. Anyway, regardless, they tested the timely prominence, blah, blah. Conflicts also produced significant new issues and questions for cultivation and analysis, many of which were still being developed and pursued a decade and a half later. Why all the fighting? We cannot review all the changes and counter-arguments and details, but it seems safe to say that the most fundamental issues of contention revolved around questions of spuriousness. What's that mean? When a relationship is spurious, what's that mean? Like, for example, police believe that on a full moon, people commit more crimes. Is that really the case? Or how about another one? There's a correlation between the number of firefighters at a fire and the damage that's done. Does that mean the firefighters are doing the damage? Somebody tell me why there'd be a lot of firefighters at a fire that caused a lot of damage.
It was a bad fire.
Yeah, that's why it was the size of the fire is what caused both the damage and the firefighters to get there. So this or there was a correlation they did one time that they found out to be false. So spuriousness is a false correlation. Okay, they found a connection between murder rates and high-profile heavyweight championship fights. So if Ali and Frazier fought, there would be like 10% more murders that night after the fight. And what they found out is that what day of the week do most fights take place?
Friday?
Yeah, usually Friday or Saturday. When have you ever seen a heavyweight fight take place on Monday? I mean, seriously, right? Huh?
So that'd be one.
Yeah, it's dumb. That's why I criticize the NCAA tournament. They have their championship game on like a Monday or Tuesday. It's like, what the hell is that? At 9 o'clock at night. I mean, you are knocking out everybody 12 and under is not going to be able to watch the whole entire thing. Well, some of them maybe. But anyway. And use of statistical controls, meaning bringing things in like social demographics, people's pre-existing value system, political identification, age, race, gender. We just proved that even though there's a lot of similarity between the television shows you guys watch, don't you think men and women watch television differently? Not only do they watch different shows, but don't you think men and women take different things away from television? Okay? I doubt men sit around and go, you know what, it is terrible the way women get portrayed on television. Man, those people on Spike TV are sickos. They're making girls in bikinis jump around on trampolines. What a terrible display of sexism. No, most men are like, cool. Make sure to DVR that. Rewind it 14 times, play it in slow motion. Like, that's why I laughed when Colin Powell's brother was head of the FCC when Janet Jackson did her little thing with Justin Timberlake, ripped her top off. And he came out and said it was the worst thing he'd ever seen. He talked about it was the downfall of Western civilization. And you know, behind the scenes, he was sitting there rewinding it, going, oh yeah, oh, that's Janet. Let me have it, Janet. Don't hold it back now. You know, seriously. Like, it shouldn't be any shock that healthy men have a sexual obsession to some extent. And I doubt he was upset that Janet Jackson's boob came out. I don't think that he was crying in the aisles and was trying to, you know, end all this. I mean, it was nonsense. And I think they eventually fined CBS or whoever the station was. And now there's a 7-second delay, which is not really time. Make much of a difference. But anyway, so and then on here as well. So the majority of early publications took the form of percentage comparison shown across light, medium, and heavy viewers overall and within key demographic subgroups, and the subgroups were examined once at a time. That is, results were presented for males, older peoples. It goes on to talk about, in general, so you're going to have to read through this section about what Hirsch's main ideas here, and you see it on page 75 is here. Both Hughes and Hirsch reported that relationships they examined were nonlinear under controls, meaning that this stuff wasn't just TV viewing, demographic variables, cultivation effect. It was more like this. And now we're going to move into question 3. Let me just do it here. So now we're going to move into question 3, where people say, you know what, the people who were promoting cultivation theory wanted to say that, okay, mainstreaming corrects all the problems. We still got a linear relationship. Heavy viewing versus light viewing is still the #1 category that we're looking at. But Hirsch and other people, Hughes and other people like that, as well as people like Stuart Hall, who talked about the message and the messenger. We're not going to get into that necessarily. But anyway, but the idea, they said, look. Maybe part of the relationship is linear. So we have these pre-existing beliefs. That mix with things like social demographics, and then related, obviously, is personality. Obviously, these things are all related to each other. Okay? And they say, look, this decides not cultivation effect, but which TV programs I'm going to watch and for how long. Then that tends to potentially cultivate views. And that this cultivation then impacts pre-existing beliefs, personality. And if you want to combine these all into one box. So the simple view of this would be the feedback loop. So the interpretation model is, look, it gives more weight, so I'm going to write these things down. 1, the interpretation model gives more weight to the audience member in interpreting the material. Let's take the Janet Jackson case. Some people thought that was disgusting. Other people thought it was the coolest thing in the world. How in the world can people have such divergent views when they saw the same thing? Or 9/11. Some people had one reaction. Some people were really, really angry. Some people were not as angry. Some people were calling people up and celebrating. Those people got their phones tapped by the FBI. I'm serious. People, I know this is hard to believe, people sent congratulatory text messages to people that day. Going, man, about time. There are people, I know this is hard to believe for some of you, there are people in this country who hate this. Timothy McVeigh was an American. He killed 300 people, including like 26 children. Okay? I mean, there are people in this country that are nuts. Okay? I'm trying to think of some other stuff. Like, or like take a political debate. Some people say, look, Obama won the debate. Other people say John McCain won the debate. What do you think determines whether or not somebody thinks John McCain or Obama won the debate in their own personal behavior? Right, whatever, if their political identification, which is related to things like age and gender and where you grew up and how much money you make. Like if you make over $250,000, you're voting for Mitt Romney. Okay, seriously, for the most part. If you're an older American, you're voting for Mitt Romney. If you're a conservative married woman, you're voting for Santorum. Seriously. So again, these things matter. And television interacts with these things. It's not the generator of these things. Think about the interpretation model this way. It's more of an enhancement effect or reinforcement effect. So let's take it as more simple. So we have these ideas of, let's just call it personality, which is the combination of social demographics and people's experience and stuff. That again leads to choice, television choice. Okay? This leads to interpretation and internalization. Maybe I'm a conservative. Rush Limbaugh's talking about an issue I didn't know about. Now he's cultivating my view on that. Maybe it's the SOPA bill. Maybe it's the health care bill. Like when the health care bill came out, don't you think Rush Limbaugh was out there educating the public about what this meant for you, the conservative person? Don't you think he was saying stuff like this? Remember that controversy that Obama got into about forcing Catholic institutions to pay for birth control and abortion? You remember that one? That came out of seemingly out of nowhere. Where do you think it really came out of? Who do you think was talking about that drove conservatives into a frenzy over this? Rush Limbaugh and Bill O'Reilly and people like that. I don't think the Obama administration was out there going, you know what, we made a major mistake. I just thought I'd like to tell everybody. Here's the mistake we made. And here's what we're not going to do to fix it. I don't think that's the way, you know, when you're in the White House, you want to make it look like you're doing everything right. And everything that's good is because of you. And everything that's bad because of Republicans. Okay, or the Congress. Some people just like to blame the Congress. Anyway, so interpretation, internalization. Okay? And this in turn impacts personality, which then again leads to choice, choosing those programs, same programs again, which again internalizes the ideas. Then so this is a reinforcement process. What we call a feedback loop. And this is actually a theoretical construct that's used in economics. Like, somebody explain to me why it's bad for the media and the government to go out and say that a depression is coming. What kind of a feedback loop does that create in consumer spending?
People will pull their money out of stocks and then...
So then the stocks go down more, and then more people lose their jobs, and the more people lose their jobs, the more people are selling their stocks, or cutting back their spending. You are not going to buy a car in that type of environment. So it creates a dangerous spiral. Just like the opposite can happen. People start getting jobs during the end of a recession. They start spending more money. More money people start spending. The more company profits go up. Company profits go up. They start hiring more people. They hire more people. Profits go up. Again, it just spirals up. The problem is, for theoretical perspective, it's hard to tell when the spiral starts going up and then starts going down, the inflection point. Like, when does it start going down and when does it start going up? And what are the forces surrounding it? But with media effects, this is really the one that people look at as the legitimate model. As the thing that matters. So again, so number 3, what is the interpretation or interpretive model? I should say interpretation model. How is it different? How is it different in mainstreaming when it comes to its main assumptions and research focus? And basically, it's the idea that it takes more fully into account the audience interpretation of the material itself. It takes more into account the personality of the individuals, social demographic variables. It also takes into account that these are non-linear relationships. When people see a show they like or agree with, are they more likely to watch more of that show or less likely? Like, let me put it this way. Does Rush Limbaugh have people who tune in every single day, can't get enough of him? Right? Just like Keith Olbermann. People love these, or Oprah maybe is a better idea too. What is, you know, do people who don't agree with Oprah's views in general, do they watch her show? Does anybody who doesn't like Oprah do what she says? But do people who like Oprah do exactly what she says? I hope to God, now her network is suffering now, but when she was big time, if you had a book or a product, they have a documentary, it's called The Oprah Effect on ABC. If I booked and I got on Oprah, how many books do you, and Oprah told people to read it, how many books do you think I'd sell the next day? 2, 3 million? I cashed a check. I'd give her such a, I'd be like, thanks a lot, Oprah. You're the greatest person on earth. You should run for president. Like, just let me cash the check. Remember that one jackass that wrote that book called A Million Pieces? When he made it all up? He got on Oprah and he got all that money. He didn't give that money back. Okay? Remember she gave away cars and cuckoo clocks and all kinds of crazy crap. Okay? She's got the Oprah Book Club. You know, she has people on like did she make Dr. Oz's career basically? That guy wouldn't have a job. You know? Anyway, alright, any more questions here? Oh, here's this element of confirmation bias. So within this, that element of choosing shows that you only agree with, that's the idea of confirmation bias. Since our test is due on Tuesday, I'll send you some notes on that, but that one's pretty straightforward. You can look that one up online. If you look up confirmation bias, it'll be up there. It said, how can these two theories be combined to make a comprehensive theory? You can look, young people and uneducated people get cultivated, or things you don't know about. Other people, you interpret material. All right, everybody. If you have any have a good weekend, everybody. If you have any issues, email me. I'm going to get this feedback loop thing up there. You can see some of the stuff in here, and I'll give you a little blurb or something on confirmation bias. But in general, it's that idea of only identifying with or watching material that you agree with. Meaning that when for an individual does it become a disorder, and when for a society does it become such an issue that it has to be addressed by the government or is causing some kind of problem, like environmental damage or crime. You may want to use the House of Cards video here, right? Seemed like those individuals were infected by this crap, and these companies were too. Remember when Kyle Bass told them that you're headed for disaster? Remember when he told Bear Stearns and those idiots they were headed for disaster? How did they react? Did they take him seriously?